Sabbath to everybody. Um, before I start, I wanted to see if any of you saw the pictures of the youth in the lobby of when they went to San Francisco to feed the homeless. We went with some of us went with them, but it was a joy to see them just give out food and just to go. So it's a blessing for us as adults. We're not really there to do anything for them, but I just want to let you know that the youth here they're very committed to doing God's work, and we hope that they continue to do that as they grow. Um, I want to start off with a story that really impacted my life years ago, and in thinking about this story, I have a feeling that a lot of you may know of this story. It was 2005 when I gave my life to Christ, and one of the things that I thought it was a normal thing, or something that all Adventists did, because it was a little short time after I got baptized that my wife said to me she wanted to take me somewhere. Now, where do you think somebody who's Adventist would take a new Adventist? Have you thought, where would you take them? Well, to me, I thought it was what everybody did. She wanted to take me to the ABC. I don't know if any of you, does anybody here know, is there anybody here who doesn't know what the ABC is? Emmanuel, it's Adventist Book Center. And it's a library. They sell books, they sell a lot of Bibles, just a lot of Adventist books. And my wife took me, let's go. She wanted to take me like it was a candy store or something. And I went, and she was looking for something I think she was looking for something for the kids at that time. It was 13, almost 14 years ago. And I was sitting there looking around, and I really didn't know what I wanted to get. She said, well, what interests you? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm new. I don't I don't know what to look for. And I ran into this small little book. It was like 75 cents. And I read a short piece of the story that I'm going to share with you today. And it just caught my attention, that little story. And to me, it was a new story. And I hope that even if you already know it, that you understand why I want to share it with you and why I compare it to a story from the Bible. So I wanted to ask, do any of you remember being able to read when you were 3 years old? Anybody? Too long ago. Well, was anybody here a Latin scholar when you were 6? No? No? Well, what about when you were 10? Maybe this is a little easier. Were you proficient in both arithmetic and Greek when you were 10 years old? No? Any hands? No? Don't be embarrassed. We won't. We're not good. What about, did anybody here enter college when you were 16? 14. Well, maybe I should introduce who I'm going to talk about today. It was a story that I read. His name, he was born in 1798, and his name was Adoniram Judson. Maybe you've heard of him. He was known for being one of the first missionaries to the country of Burma, and he eventually translated the Bible into that language. He was the first one to do so. But when I read all these things about him as a young age, you can see why we as parents pray so much for our kids. We have this future almost planned out for them, what we would like them to grow up to be. And so when I read all these things about Adoniram, you might think, wow, that boy must have lived a perfect life. He must have grown up to be just a continuous life of fulfilled goals and all these good things about him. But it wasn't like that. When he was 16 years old, he went into Brown University, which at that time was called a Rhode Island College, I believe, but now we know it as Brown University. And when he was 19, he graduated as a valedictorian of his class. And you would think he's off to the perfect life. He's off to be just as a person, an example to others of what all of us should want to be. But see, when he was in college, he met another boy who was his age, who was also very smart, a brilliant person. But there was one thing about him. His name was Jacob Eames. And one of the things about him was that he rejected all religion. So imagine a young man goes into college. His parents had raised him to fear God and to learn. Just everything seemed right to what they had, the way they had raised him. And there he meets him. And there's nothing wrong with meeting people like that. We meet people all the time. But he had an influence in his life. And it changed everything that his parents had taught him. It affected all of that. So when he graduated, he goes home. And you have to think of the influence that his friend Jacob had on him. So he had decided that he wanted to go and write for the theater in New York City. His parents were very against it because that's not what they wanted for him. His dad insisted that he stay and continue to study to be a minister. His parents tried everything. You have to understand that when I say that his friend rejected God, it doesn't mean that he just comes home and he has doubts. His parents noticed a change in him. Everything the way that they had raised him, everything that they had done for him was changed. So his parents tried to convince him to stay, but he wouldn't. You see, he was going through something that a lot of people in this world go through, and a lot of the characters in the Bible have gone through also. He was going through a revolt with his own soul. Sometimes we call it rebellion. Sometimes we call it unease, maybe confusion. Maybe we're not sure what our purpose is in life yet. His soul was in revolt. He even felt like a hypocrite when he prayed, because everything that he had everything that he had learned from his parents didn't make sense to him anymore. So imagine feeling like a hypocrite when he was praying. So finally he told his parents, "Your church is no longer mine. The Bible is nothing but the works of man," he told them. He says, even Jesus was only a man. You can imagine his parents' heartbreak as he told them this. His mom wept over him. You can imagine her. I try to imagine not only the weeping, because I think as parents, we always pray and cry over our kids when they make decisions that are not like maybe we raised them. But it says that she pursued him all over the house. Imagine that, trying to talk to your son into doing something better for him. And not finally, but something that she did a lot, she prayed for him. But he left anyways. He left to what he called his freedom. Does that remind you of a story in the Bible? The story, it's my favorite story in the Bible, and it's not the story that I'm going to talk about today, but it's the story about the prodigal son in Luke, the book of Luke. But when I read that parable, and then I read this story, I realize that those are not the only two prodigals in this world. A lot of us are. And a lot of the other Bible characters that we have come to know from the Bible are. So one day when he leaves off to his freedom, to what he called freedom, he goes to stay in a hotel. When he comes in, they tell him, we only have one room. And they say, this is the only room we have. You might not sleep. There's a young man in the room across from yours who's dying, and you might not be able to sleep. Throughout the night, he heard noises. He heard footsteps, somebody walking back and forth. He heard boards creaking, low voices. And then he heard a groan or a gasp. Something was happening in his heart, and he wondered, who is this person? Was he ready for death? And when that question came up in his mind, he thought, well, what about me? Am I ready for death? And how am I going to face it when that comes? You see, God was trying to do something in his life now. So terror filled his heart as he thought of death, and he became fearful. And he started to fear, what's going to happen to me then? But with it all, the worst thing that he felt was shame. Because he says that when he felt so low, he remembered all the things that his friend used to tell him in college. And he says he could imagine him laughing at the decisions that he was making and what he was going through. And so the night went, he made it through the night. And the next morning, as he was checking out of the inn, he asked the manager, he said, what happened to that boy who was across who was in the room next to mine? He says, who was he? Well, he was a young man from Providence. He says his name was Eames. He said, Jacob Eames. Adoniram wondered if God had put him there for a reason and had failed to minister to him. Imagine all of a sudden you have this path that you have decided is going to be your path. And in a situation like this, God is trying to tell you something. Can you imagine? Especially now that you have accepted Christ and you trust him with everything, but imagine him at that time. Imagine that turmoil in his mind and in his heart, trying to figure out what his purpose was. I can only imagine, and just thinking about the things I have gone through. I don't think they compare to what he was going through then. But after realizing what God was trying to do with him, it came a point where he had to make a decision. The book that I read calls it that he was at a crossroad. He had to make a decision. He chose to go home. And you might think he went home to his mother's love. He went home so he can be with dad. It was different this time. He had chosen to accept Jesus. But on his road, after he accepted Jesus, he went through a lot of things. On his road, he went through agonies of his soul. You can imagine someone finally making the decision, and he went through agonies of his soul. It led him to further study, to full surrender to God, and at the age of 25, to the mission field. And that's when he went to Burma, and where he was there for years, and he helped to translate the Bible into the Burmese language at the age of 25. Imagine, he graduated at 19, so there 6 years. Imagine those, around 7 years. Imagine everything that went on in his life there. But through all of this, he lost 2 wives. He experienced torture because when he was in Burma, the country was in war with them. And so he was captured and tortured. So he was imprisoned So he endured torture, imprisonment, suffering. But the thing that we should all remember is that because he had accepted Jesus, he never again experienced the agony of soul he felt that day in the village inn. So a lot of these things that we would never wish on anybody came to him, but that didn't bother him. He went through it. Because he had accepted Jesus, to him, the worst part was how he felt when he realized his friend was across the room from him, and he felt like God had put him there for a reason. Adoniram died on April 12th, 1850. When I was reading that story, I just want to say that the little book that I bought had a very small, very little information on him, and so I had to, because it touched me so much. I preached about it in the Spanish church years ago, but I used it more of a footnote. I really didn't go into his life, and so in preparing for this, I kind of went more. I wanted more details, and I wanted to share a lot more with you. And I realized how much we all have in common with someone like him. You know, we might not be in another country as missionaries, but a lot of people, not only from our church, but from other churches, are over there sharing Jesus with, where we're here in the comfort of this church. But there's another prodigal in the Bible. And it's not the prodigal from Luke 15. David, also as a young man, and just I won't speed it up too much, but in 1 Samuel 16:12, the Bible talks about how he was so good looking, how he had these bright eyes, and that he was just, imagine. I don't know if anybody said that about you when you were little. I don't know if you remember. But it said that he was just good looking, and he had these bright eyes, and I think the Bible uses the word ruddy, I believe. That, he was just the beautiful little boy. In 16:13, 1 Samuel 16:13, he was anointed, also a teenager. And also in his teen years, in Samuel 17:50, is when he struck down Goliath with only a sling and a stone. Another young man who had been raised a certain way, and God had chosen him, had said all these great things about him, and you would also, the same as Adoniram, he was just going to be the greatest king ever with no mistakes. But if we move on to 2 Samuel 11:4, he can't resist temptation. And we don't need to go into details about what happened, but you know what happened with David. He committed adultery. In 2 Samuel 11:14, so the woman that he committed adultery with, so her husband doesn't find out, he has him killed to hide what he had done. And in 2 Samuel 12:15, the child that was a result of that adultery dies. In 2 Samuel 17, the Bible talks about his own son, Absalom, pursuing him and trying to kill him. Do you see the comparisons in the lives that Adoniram lived and what David is living? And yet, with all the things that happen in David's life, this is what God says about David in Acts 13:22. He says, "And when he had removed him, he raised up for them David, as king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will." One of the greatest promises that we have is that of which David clung onto when he was going through all these things. I want to read something from Patriarchs and Prophets 754. Ellen White says, "Great had been David's fall, but deep was his repentance. Ardent was his love, and strong his faith. He had been forgiven much, and therefore he loved much." The Psalms of David pass through the whole range of experience, from the depths of conscious guilt and self-condemnation to the loftiest faith and the most exalted communion with God. His life record declares that sin can bring only shame and woe, but that God's love and mercy can reach to the deepest depths. That faith will lift up the repenting soul to share the adoption of the sons of God. Of all the assurances which his word contains, it is one of the strongest testimonies to the faithfulness, the justice, and the covenant mercy of God. And so David experienced all these things, and that's why they turned their heart back to God, because they remembered this. We have that too. Those same promises that he clung on to, and where he expressed how he felt in the Psalms, we have those too. So when you look to February of 23rd of 2019, when Jesus died on the cross, he was looking to this day, and he knows what we're going through. He knows what you're going through, and he knows that where we've come from, or if maybe some of you have come from a background, maybe not like David, but maybe like Adoniram, maybe growing up that way, or maybe you drifted from the church, from God's ways, and you're back, or maybe you've been praying for somebody who is over there. I mentioned praying for our kids. We all do that when they go away, when they make different choices. Even if everything's good, we're praying for them because we don't get to see them. And I like to read 3 verses from the Bible that I believe those are the things that we should never forget. Because I can sit here and tell you that God is always going to be with you, and I can tell you all these great things about what he has done in my life. And these 3 verses are very telling, and I think that we should always remember them. And I think we remember them, but I think let's go to them. To Isaiah 9:6. Isaiah 9:6 says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." We tend to read those verses only for Christmas, but we should think about these verses every day. Another verse is in Luke 1:32 and 33. 32 says, "He will be great and will be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." And the last one, which David wrote, Psalm 103, verses 17 and 18. "But the mercy of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him, and his righteousness to children's children, to such as keep his covenant, and to those who remember his commandments to do them." I just want to share with you that you are very special in God's eyes, all of you. And so are all of those people outside, our family, our kids that are away in college, maybe your coworker. Um, have you ever thought of what you want to pray for the person next to you? Have, we sometimes get so caught up in just living our life. I heard a sermon the last couple of weeks that how much we have to have a relationship with God. And our relationship with God means opening His Word and just being close with Him. And the pastor was talking about how sometimes our relationship with God is only a song. You know, we get home and we listen to a song, and that's our relationship with God. And that's all nice. There are beautiful songs that we can listen to. But he says that we can fall into the trap of living a life kind of like almost like a romantic life with God, to where we listen to the song and that's all we get from Him. We don't get into the Word, we don't pray. And I have found that, sometimes we do that. We don't want to read the Bible. And so what do? We just play our favorite songs. And we play our favorite songs. And there's nothing wrong with that. He was just saying that it's important for us to get into His Word and have a really close relationship with Him. There's a song that I like to listen to, and I like it because when I put it on, Nadia will walk by and she'll be like, "Oh, that's a good song." She'll walk by and sometimes I'll put it on my earphones, and we all have those songs that kind of touch our heart or touch us in a special way. And but the song has these words that really touch me, and you might know it, Diane and Allison. But the words are, I'm going to read the first part of the song. It's a song called "My Living Hope" by Phil Wickham. And if you want to listen to it, pay attention to the words. He says in this song, "How great the chasm that lay between us, how high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation, I turned to heaven and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope." Thank you.